Nice. Awesome. So next we have Serafina, and she's going to be talking about experiential trauma support. She is a wonderful human who has spent her last little while learning about trauma support and is launched a project called the Seraphina project, which helps to give trauma support to those who need it most after her own experience within the system. And she has lived experience and experience of complex PTSD as well. So she's coming from that standpoint, and we really appreciate her being here today, and I'm looking forward to learning from her and actually doing some cool activities too. So Serafina, please take it away, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for that introduction. Super appreciate it. I've never done the Zoom thing before, and it seems kind of weird, but we're going to go with this. So hi, everybody. I'm Serafina. And just so you know, the way that I have laid out the workshop is that we're going to begin with a grounding and orientation exercise. And then I'm going to speak a little bit about myself, my background, and then I'm going to dive into trauma and the effects on the nervous system. And I have some examples of how you would be working with people and that are in crisis or in different states of the nervous system, and how you kind of bring them out of fight and flight or freeze or fawn. And then at the end of the workshop, we're going to have 15 minutes of Q&A. So if you do have questions, that would be a great time to ask them. So I'm going to get started. So the first thing I'm going to have you do is, wherever you're sitting, wherever you are, just kind of get into a comfortable spot. See if there's if there's a way that you can make yourself 5% more comfortable. And if you're feeling good, you can close your eyes. You can leave them open too. We're just going to bring our focus down to our feet. Just feel our feet. What's the sensation inside of our feet? How does it feel for our feet to touch the ground? And then we're just going to go to our seat and feel how our seat feels, the sensation of our seat on our seat. And then we're going to go up to our eyes. We're going to open our eyes, and we're going to look straight behind us and very slowly look around our space. And if there's anything that catches our eye, we can take a breath while we look at it, and then continue looking around our space. And if we see another object that catches our eye, take a breath with it again. And then when we're ready, we can put our attention back onto the screen. And what we're doing with that exercise is we're telling our nervous system that we're safe, because our nervous system is run by a reptilian section of our brain. So that's the section that is not quite fully formed yet. It's very animalistic. And when we look around and we take in our surroundings, we're going and we're telling and affirming to our nervous system that you are safe. There's no predators here. Nobody's going to try to kill you. You're all good. And so that allows your body to just relax a little bit more. And I'd like to take a minute to acknowledge that this workshop is taking place on the unceded territory of the Algonquin, Songhees, and Wisenak peoples. We recognize that the institutions, land, and places we inhabit wouldn't be possible without the displacement of the First Peoples prior. And what that means to me is that I'm privileged to be a settler on this land. And growing up in Winnipeg, I was witness to the racism Indigenous people in Canada encounter. So I actively seek to be part of a future where discrimination does not exist by educating myself on racism and decolonization. This land acknowledgement is a step to better relations, and I recognize more work needs to be done. Way more work needs to be done. And I just feel like I want to take a moment just to sit with that and just to feel what that means. Sometimes I feel like we just rush through the land acknowledgements, so I just wanted to take that space for that. And now I am ready to begin. So I'm here today because um, about 10 years ago, I was homeless and I was diagnosed with complex PTSD. And at the time, I didn't know what that meant. Nobody took me aside and said, hey, this is what's up. This is what that means. This is what you need to do. It was more just like I got the diagnosis as a one off and they just left me on the street. And I found it extremely difficult to get any form of help. And it took me at probably a good I was probably on the street for about well, I was without an address for 5 or 6 years, and I only started to stabilize about 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And about 2 years ago, circumstances in my life lined up so that I actually I was kind of like, what is CPTSD? What does this mean? And I started doing research. And then as I started doing research, all of a sudden, all these things were like, oh my God, that's why that didn't work. Oh my God, that is why I can't seem to stabilize. And that's why I think this way. And that, like, what I started saying to my friends, I have trauma brain, and my trauma brain gets activated, and then certain things happen. And then I started finding materials that actually supported that. And I just kind of the more I did research, the more I was just like, oh my God, this is freaking amazing. And it's unbelievable that nobody actually took me aside to help me with this or educate me or inform me on this. And so then I started to realize that there were certain things that I would just never be able to do unless I actually received treatment and I actually figured out how to step out of what I call a trauma cycle. A trauma cycle is basically when you're so enmeshed in trauma that you just keep doing the patterns that just keep making the trauma happen or more trauma happening, or you attract more trauma. It's like a trauma cycle. It's like an abuse cycle, but trauma instead. Also, sometimes I get really excited. So if I start talking too fast, just tell me to slow down, just as an FYI. So a couple of big things for me was the inability to stabilize. And by stabilize, I mean actually secure housing and actually have a secure form of income. I couldn't actually work because of my own mental health and because of the complex PTSD. And without a job, I couldn't get secured living space. As a single woman, I am usually last on the list for pretty much anything because anybody with children is going to be prioritized. Um, any minority is going to be prioritized usually over me too, which is fine. Um, it just seemed to be that was the way that I flowed through the system in my personal experience. That was just my personal experience. So I kept just finding that it was just really incredibly hard to stabilize. It was hard to get stable housing that actually didn't have negative effects on me. I realized that part of my problem was that with complex PTSD, one of the symptoms is hypervigilance. And hypervigilance is when you're constantly seeking out danger around you, and so your system never actually rests. And usually after about 6 months of living with any form of roommate, I would usually just have a meltdown. And it would feel like I'm just exhausted and my system is overwhelmed. And I realized that that's part of what was happening for me was that I was with people I didn't feel 100% safe with. And so therefore, my system was constantly working overtime, making sure that I was safe at an unconscious level. And then there was also this, as part of my story, there's also abusive relationships. So I was moving from abusive relationship to abusive relationship to abusive relationship, which was adding to the traumas that I'd already experienced in my life. And so about 2 years ago, I was just like, this all has to stop. And so at that time, I had made the proud accomplishment of having a job for 2 years, which was amazing. And I had found really cheap rent, and I created a home for myself, and I lived by myself. And I realized that it's a huge privilege to have a home that I can live in by myself with cheap rent in Victoria. And it's also been one of my saving graces. And in my personal advocacy, I do believe that people with complex PTSD need to have their own spaces. They can't be stuffed into a room full of people and expected to thrive, because until they're at least healed, until their nervous system comes back to being regulated. Because if their system is unregulated, it's just going to cause them to go into hypervigilance. Because, yeah, we'll get more into complex PTSD a little bit later. So now I've been working a full-time job, and I've been stabilized for a couple of years now, and I've been feeling really good about my life, and I decided that I was going to try to get therapy again. And before, I had been trying to get free therapy and finding the therapist to be either unprepared to deal with what was going on with my life and with the traumas, or I've been on wait lists for years now. And so just there's a lack of services being offered. So I was like, well, I'm working this full-time job. I should be able to afford therapy. And I cannot afford therapy. And so the privilege of therapy and the privilege of being housed and all of these privileges kind of just like came to me. And I was just like, this is so ridiculous. There is just, it shouldn't be this hard to get therapy, to get mental health, to get housed. It should just not be this difficult. And I decided that I needed to have my voice heard, basically. So I started my project, the Seraphina project, and we focus on getting people educated. So we have one leg of the program right now that is very active, and that is the part of the program where we educate people who were just like me a few years ago, who are struggling with housing, struggling with stabilization. And the whole goal with that is just to teach them about trauma, how it affects them, and everything that goes on with that, and how to separate, how to regulate. And then I'm also developing curriculums now for people who are working with those people, so that they can actually help, just help teach other people how to regulate too. So it's kind of like, it's just going to be like I'm sorry, I can see it in my brain, and I don't know if anybody else can see it in my brain, but I'm just kind of like, I will provide you with all the information, and then all the support workers will be providing all this information to the people who need it most, who are the people on the street. So that's what I'm working on right now. It's called the Seraphina Project. I will put a link to it later. Or Sage, maybe you can do that. Thank you. Okay, so I want to talk about, before we get started, I want to define trauma. So I'm studying to be a somatic based trauma informed coach. And so how we define trauma somatically is it's anything that is too much, too soon, and too fast. This is a very broad definition, because the way that we are looking at trauma is how it actually affects your nervous system. And anything that is too much, too soon, and too fast is going to have an impact on your nervous system and send it into a dysregulated state. And when the easier that we can regulate our nervous system, the more we're able to function as a independent or interdependent human being. The more we're able to think about our future, we're able to make decisions that are going to have a positive impact. We're able to step into our communities and actually help our communities. And a piece of information that is also really important is that there is a huge difference between PTSD and complex PTSD. And most people say that I talk to say to me that, oh, well, I've had PTSD and I went to therapy for 6 months and it healed PTSD. That will not happen with complex PTSD, and that probably won't happen with most of the people that are living on the street. Because what happens is PTSD is one incident, or it's a, one or two incidences that are impacting the nervous system and causing dysregulation. And so when you go and you see a therapist, the therapist can zone in on that one or two thing, those one or two things, and they can work with you on that. What happens with complex PTSD is that it's usually developed in childhood. And so you are taking basically like an entire lifetime of trauma that has been inside the nervous system that has actually changed the way that a person completely relates to the world. And all of the traumas become interlayered inside of the nervous system. And so now you have like 20, 30 different traumas that are all interconnected like this. And then you have to get a therapist that can actually help you unwind the bits of trauma, even if they don't make sense, because when they start to get layered into your nervous system like that, they start to intertwine themselves. So like the client might think that they're working on this, and then all of a sudden this comes up, and then this comes up, and then this comes up. And the way that the nervous system works is that it doesn't go in a straight line. It goes in a very loopy way. And eventually the trauma does get regulated, but it's all based and it's led by the body. And that's the best way to go through the trauma and actually get it released. Because when we have something that happens that's too much too soon, it gets stuck in the body. And that's what's happening with the trauma, is it's getting stuck inside of the body and it needs to release. And so something that happens with complex PTSD from childhood is it actually changes the way that a person's brain operates inside of the world. And that's another thing that people don't seem to understand as a major difference between PTSD and complex PTSD. Typically, a person who's experienced PTSD, and I would also argue, just as a side note, I would also argue that a lot of veterans have complex PTSD that's adult induced rather than just PTSD, especially if they've seen combat, because what I've seen just in my experience is that they often they often have brains that seem to be more similar to people with complex PTSD than PTSD. That's just a random aside of a thought I just had. Um, so with PTSD, what is commonly happening is that a person has already a foundation. And so they have a foundation where they can regulate themselves. They have a foundation with support, with family all around them. Usually they have a good friend system. So they just have a lot of support. They have they have something that happens and it causes a PTSD effect. They go to therapy and they are able to just see the world safe again. With complex PTSD, typically what happens is, first of all, their brain chemistry is changing is changed, so they don't have the regular brain chemistry that an average person does. The chemicals that produce, I believe, serotonin just don't produce enough, which is why a lot of people with complex PTSD struggle with anxiety and depression disorders. It's just part of the brain chemistry that was just never formed properly. They grow up with this idea that the world is dangerous and they can't trust anybody, which is a totally different way of thinking than a person who hasn't had to see the world as a dangerous place to survive. So, with complex PTSD, you're dealing with someone who is automatically going to perceive you as danger, even if you are a safe person. And if you are a safe person, they're going to perceive you as probably even more dangerous because they don't recognize safety. And so you end up having to navigate through this. And as a therapist, you're going to have to navigate through this. You're going to have to get to a point where that person actually understands you, and that person actually trusts you, and that person says, okay, it is okay for me to be safe with you. It is okay for me to express my deepest inner thoughts with you. Most of the therapists that I met when I was on the street, I couldn't trust them. And they didn't do anything that would make me feel like I could trust them. So I was just like, I'm not going to talk to you. And so it's really key that you understand that, because I feel like it's such a huge difference that people don't understand. So what we did in the beginning of the workshop, the turning around and looking around, is letting that person know that there's safety. And that's an exercise that you can use when you have someone come into your office and they're a little bit scattered and they don't feel safe. You can just ask them, just let's orient here. You might want to use different words, but that's going to help relax their nervous system to start to build a relationship where they can actually trust you, because it's going to calm them down. It's going to put them a little bit more inside of their body. I feel like I need to look at my notes. Oh yeah, another thing with complex PTSD is that they're easily overwhelmed. There's an inability to focus. There's brain fog. So forms are extremely hard to fill out. And when you give someone instructions verbally, there's no guarantee that they're actually going to remember it. And it's not their fault at all. It is literally just they are in trauma brain. They're in fight or flight, freeze or fawn. And they're probably going to be like, okay, and then not remember. Because literally trauma impacts the short-term memory. And there's a lot of disassociation and depersonalization that happens with trauma. Disassociation is like the bane of my existence. I'm just going to say that flat out. It's the worst. And I've had so many people, they've been like, okay, you disassociate, and then they try to solve my problem. And this happened a lot, and it actually made me really annoyed. And I actually just like stopped talking to support people about what I was experiencing, because I got so annoyed with this, because they'd be like, just breathe. And yes, breathing helps calm down my nervous system, but it does not help with disassociation. For me, when I disassociate, it is often, there's two different ways that it happens. The way that annoys me the most is sometimes I'll be in a situation where all of a sudden it will feel like my body is being hit by a truck going full force, and all of me is going out. And my body is doing that to keep me safe. And I understand that now, but when I was on the street, I didn't actually understand what that meant. I didn't understand that I was disassociating. I didn't understand why my body was doing what it was doing at all. And nobody was giving me context. Nobody was saying, hey, you are having a perfectly sane and normal response to a completely inhumane situation and to a dangerous situation. Your responses are normal. What kept happening to me over and over and over again is I kept being told that my responses were wrong, and that I wasn't allowed to be upset, and I wasn't allowed to be angry, and I wasn't allowed to express any feelings, and I just had to shut up and just take it. Even though I was in very dangerous situations often, and even though what was happening was traumatic. And then when I got into a mode of stabilization, there was no support. It was like, oh great, you're housed now. That's great. You can just take care of yourself now. And every time I make a move, my entire nervous system freaks out, because my my body doesn't know that it's safe. I've spent so long being told that I need to get
Mm.
out, I need to be somewhere else, I can't be here in the impermanence of the world. And when I have a safe space, it takes months for my body to actually unwind and understand that it's safe. And so when I moved into this current apartment, even though I've been stabilized now for 2 or 3, 4 years now, I moved here last year. When I first moved in, my entire body freaked out, and I actually spent a few months in a disassociated state. And it was really annoying because when you're disassociated, you lose time, you you lose your memory, I start losing track of things, and I forget that I need to do things like eating or cleaning or sleeping. And when I was before I understood what was happening and before I had this safe space to actually unwind from everything that I was experiencing, I didn't realize all of these things that I was doing were ways of managing, were ways that my body was managing the situation. And it was only when I got to a safe space that I was able to start unwinding it. And then when I started to get into therapy, because I received a grant, um, it was the first time I worked with a trauma therapist. And the trauma therapist actually taught me how to regulate my nervous system and actually taught me that everything was perfectly normal. And it was like the first time that I'd ever had somebody outside of my friend circle being like, yes, what you're experiencing is perfectly normal. It makes sense what you are experiencing. And that was like the real key point where I was just like, everybody needs access to this. I don't care who you are. If you have this trauma, if you have developmental trauma, if you're trying to stabilize, you need access to this. So, one of the biggest things, there's a couple of big things that actually changed my life and changed my changed my capacity to live in life. So, something else that I think is really important for people to understand about people with complex PTSD is that there is a lack of trust in others. There's also a lack of ability to feel and a lack of ability to understand what is safe. So, in this context, like I remember people asking me, like, how do you feel about things? And I literally didn't have access to feeling. I literally couldn't tell you. All I could tell you was that probably that is better than this. But it wasn't really like that feels good. Nothing really felt good. It was kind of just like I was just a shell and I was just going to wherever I was going. And when I started coming out of it, I started to have feelings, and the feelings were too big for me to manage. And I didn't know what to do when I started to have feelings. And part of complex PTSD is because you never learned how to regulate your nervous system. Most people regulate their nervous system naturally, and they just do it without a thought process. But people with complex PTSD don't have we never learned how to do that. So it's we have to consciously think about regulating our nervous system, and nobody is teaching us how to do that. So it seems like the only way that we can learn this is if we're either self-taught, if we have access to YouTube and computers, or if we have access to therapy. And all of that just needs to change, which is part of my project. It's to change that. And I also want to talk about the lack of understanding what is safe, because what happens with complex PTSD, and this is what I call the trauma cycle, is that because we didn't grow up in a safe space, we didn't actually learn what safety was and what it feels like to be safe. And so what I experienced myself was that I ended up putting myself in situations that felt like home, thinking that home would be safe. And it turns out that it wasn't any better than the household that I grew up in, which was abusive. And so I ended up in this trauma cycle where I was just like, yeah, getting traumatized is perfectly normal because my nervous system was oriented towards danger. And so that was just the way, that's just the way it was. And I just thought that was normal. So when you're dealing with somebody with complex PTSD, you have to recognize that if you're moving them from a dangerous situation to a safe situation, you're probably going to freak them out when they get to the safe situation because it's new. It feels new. It looks new. They don't know what to think about it. Their nervous system doesn't know if they should relax or not. Like I said, it took me months to relax into this safe space that I have in my apartment. And I was already stabilized. So I feel like that's something that support workers need to be aware of as well, is that if you're changing a situation for somebody with this, like they are going to freak out in the new situation if it's better than the previous situation. Their norm is trauma, their norm is drama, their norm is harm and danger. So it's something to be aware of. And I also want to speak to the ability for people with complex PTSD to make choices. Because the more that a person is in fight, flight, okay, I guess the more that a person is activated in the nervous system, the less likely they are going to be able to think about the future. So if you're working with somebody and they have a lot of trauma that they're still working out, if they're on the street, okay, so like when I was on the street, I can tell you, the longer I was on the street, the shorter I was thinking about in terms of making decisions. I started to just make decisions based on the day that I was there because I was so far into survivalism that I could only think about today. I couldn't think about tomorrow or a week or a month from now. And sometimes I would end up in situations where people would be asking me, like, well, where are you going to be in a month? And I'd be like, it would just like overwhelm me and cause me a little bit of a panic attack because I'm like, I don't even know. I don't even know what I'm going to eat today. So I don't even know. And so the more activated people are, the less likely they're going to be able to make a choice for themselves that is healthy. And so I really feel like my experience is that if you can cultivate trust with a person who has these layers of trauma, and then you can help them make decisions that are actually going to be beneficial for them, that has a huge impact on their life. My experience of getting off the street was exactly like that, where a support worker actually intervened with the decisions that I made. And she did it with my full consent and she did it with me fully knowing. Um, but I wouldn't be off the street unless if she hadn't intervened, I would still be on the street without a doubt. And I think that it was because I trusted her and also she could see how I was unable to make a healthy decision for myself because I couldn't think any further than my day. And so she just kind of took it into her own hands to be like, you need to go here and you need to do this. And I was like, okay, because I had cultivated trust with her. And I think that I wish that somebody had done that sooner for me, to be honest, because I don't know how many opportunities I might have missed to be off the street because somebody was scared to speak up. And yeah, traumatized people are going to respond probably with bigger emotions because of the lack of regulation. And part of what you can do when you're talking to somebody is you can actually speak to them slowly you can slow down your speech pattern a little bit, and they will automatically mirror. It's what all humans do is they tend to mirror people when you're interacting with somebody. It's a way of forming connection and telling people that you're safe and you're connected and you're in your community just naturally as body language. And so if the support worker slows down the speech a little bit, it starts to regulate the other person. There's this thing, it's called co-regulation, and it's absolutely amazing and I love it. Um, and I feel like if at all possible for support workers to recognize co-regulation is a thing and then to actively pursue it, that would be great. Because I remember meeting support workers, and I would be unregulated and I would come in and then they would be unregulated, and then we would both just have this really weird conversation where nothing really got done, and then I was just like, why am I even here? And then I would just leave unhappy and be like, that was weird, you know. Or there would be like somebody would get snappy and we'd just be like, we're done, you know. And I feel like it's really important that support workers know that co-regulation is a thing, and it co-regulation is going to help a client develop trust with you. And e- co-regulation is really, really easy. It's basically when you're with a client, you're just present, you're aware of your pace of your speech, like going slower, like I said. You have open body language. And if you can, remember to take deep breaths and be in your body and just witness the person in front of you. Automatically, by doing that, the other person is going to start breathing deeper. They're going to start slowing their speech down. And if you have somebody who is going really like fast, that's usually an activation. And so just like being like, I really hear that you are experiencing a lot right now. I'm wondering, like, what can you tell me your story, but a little bit slower so I can catch more details? That's a way for them to kind of be like, oh, okay, and come back into this moment and actually tell you what is relevant inside of the story instead of going down what's called the trauma vortex. And the trauma vortex is basically what I, the trauma vortex is something that comes from Peter Levine in his book, Waking the Tiger. And it is it is a reference to the way that people get stuck inside of their traumas. And I feel like probably everybody here has seen this happen before. It's really visible in people who are like telling you about everything that's wrong in their life. They're stuck in a vortex. So they start off telling you about one thing and then it goes into another thing, and it just turns into this vortex where it's all negativity and all victimhood and it's all just, blah 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 blah. And so what you want to do when you're working with a client is just help them step out of the trauma vortex so that you can help them solve whatever you're trying to solve. And I'm saying all of these things just like thinking back to my experiences and being like, I wish that more people were able to do that, because the people who were able to do that were people that I eventually learned to trust. And they were people that I eventually learned that I could actually approach. And they were also people that I just spent time with just because it felt good to be in their presence. Um, And when I look back now, I'm like, oh, it's because they were so calm and so peaceful. They were regulating me. No wonder why I felt like they were safe people. Um, I lost my train of thought, so I'm just going to take a moment to just kind of think back to what I was talking about. If anyone could remind me, that would be good. Oh yeah, trauma vortex. So, so with the trauma vortex, you can kind of think the trauma vortex takes up a lot of energy too. And so when we start to regulate people, we start to free up their energy. When we start to help them focus in the present moment and take them out of the trauma vortex, we start to give them the ability to start to regulate their own systems. And we start to help them. I feel like it's a very natural process, but we start to help them understand that their trauma is not who they are. I think that's very, very important for everybody to recognize is that when you have somebody who has a lot of trauma or has a trauma, that trauma is not who they are. They are still a human being. And underneath all of that trauma, they are still a human that needs connection, that needs love, that needs food, that needs water, no matter how abrasive they are, no matter how spiky they are. It's because they don't know how to trust you and they don't know if you can be trusted. And trusting another person has brought them into dangerous situations before. So it's their protective mechanisms. And it's just so important to recognize that. After studying this now, um, it's been really interesting because I'm now able to recognize when I'm engaged with the trauma of somebody versus who they are. And so this work and when you're facing a client, I feel like part of what you're doing is just reminding them of who they are. Just, we're not going to go into the trauma vortex right now. We're just going to talk about how I can support you right now. And that's something that I wanted to speak to is that for people who are supporting me, there were a few things that I wish that they had known. And so one of them was understanding that the trauma is not who I am and that it's a valid and natural response to abnormal conditions. I think that would have been beautiful if people had actually told me that so that I didn't feel like I was crazy most of the time, because that's another thing that gets reiterated to you when you're on the street is that you're the crazy person. I remember being out on the street at one point and being like, how am I the crazy person when I'm just trying to get food and housing? But then all these people are just walking by me like I don't exist. And some people are spending more money on their dog. I'm just like, I don't know, how am I the crazy person here? But that was constantly reiterated to me all the time. I wished that support people had viewed me as a human and didn't objectify me. I think all of the people that I eventually came to trust, they all viewed me as a human being. And I have distinct memories of like going to different support organizations and I was just treated as a number. I was treated like I didn't exist. I remember some organizations, the people that were helping me didn't even look inside my eyes, not even once during an entire 30-minute meeting. There was no eye contact at all. So I felt like I didn't really matter. And if I tried to ask questions, it was just, it wasn't, they wouldn't even answer my questions. And I just felt like I wasn't even worthy enough as a human being to have my questions answered. And even if my questions didn't make sense, for them, I think it would have been really ideal if somebody had been like, oh, okay, so she has this complex PTSD probably, or she has these traumas probably. So she's probably struggling with brain fog. She's probably struggling with a loss of focus. She's probably struggling with the inability to follow instructions if I give them to her just verbally. So maybe asking more questions along the lines of, do you need this as a written instruction? Or if I tell you verbally, is that okay? Do you need help filling out forms? That would have been so helpful. So helpful. There was just like a bunch of stuff like that. I also wish that support people had made it clear on how they were going to help me and set the container. I had so many situations where I would walk in and they just expect me to know what to do, and I don't. And I found it very, very helpful when I started meeting people that were like, hey, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And I was like, great. And now I've gotten into the habit, now that I have boundaries and now that I have the capacity to ask questions. Whereas when I was on the street, I didn't have that capacity to ask questions because I didn't feel safe. But now I actually will ask people, you know, hey, what do you need from me? And what is it going to look like today? So that, because what it does is it calms my anxiety, just so that I know what to expect. I know what we're going to talk about. I know what the conversation is going to be like. I don't have to get all anxious. And I think that that would have helped me out in a lot of situations. Okay, I'm not following the order of my index cards, but I think that's okay. Okay, so I also want to talk about more about what you can do to help people that are coming to see you guys. Um, for basically every single type of activation, I don't have a slide for this, but I realized that I should probably have a slide for this so I can put this inside the notes or send this out by email. But I'm going to go really scientific for a second here. So somatics is all based on the vagus nerve and the polyvagal theory. And so the polyvagal theory says that there's three branches to the nervous system. And so you have your parasympathetic, where you feel safe, calm, you have eye contact, you're regulated, and this is like called the ventral nervous system. And then you have a sympathetic nervous system response, and that's when you go into fight or flight. And that's when you see a client, how you know that they're in fight or flight is that their breathing and their heart rate will increase. Um, they will feel a decrease in safety and in social engagement. So if they start to distance, if they start to try to hide, um, they will also have problems hearing your voice. A person in a sympathetic activation loses the ability to extract human voices from the background. I don't know why. Welcome to nature. And then there's an activation that's called the dorsal parasympathetic. And this is where we have immobility and freeze. And so you can tell that a person is in this state if when there's a decrease in their heart rate and their breathing, you can notice that their muscle tone kind of relaxes. Again, there's a lack of social engagement. I can tell you that when I experience the immobility or freeze or parasympathetic response, I get really still and I stop moving and I stop speaking and I also stop breathing. That's what it feels like. I obviously don't stop breathing completely, but I have to consciously remind myself to breathe because it will all get stuck up here and it won't be like a full body breath. So movement, having your client move or giving them the capacity to move is going to help in all the states because movement is how we discharge the energy that is building up inside of our nervous system. So for a lot of activations, if somebody comes in and they're super activated, then you're going to want to slow the person down, do the co-regulation. You might want to take them for a walk, or you might want to invite them to kind of just like move in their chair, to rock, something that makes them feel good. For fight and flight, if you notice that they're in fight or flight, really shaking their hands is really, really helpful at moving it through. getting them grounded and present in the moment is going to be really good. If they're in an immobility or freeze, what's really important is to get them moving. So get the client maybe drinking some water or drinking some tea, probably water, um, and just kind of asking them questions so that they start to focus on the present moment instead of what's going on in their head. I find that that has always been really helpful for me. Or when people just like throw, like literally force me to hold onto a glass of water, then all of a sudden I have to A, move my body, B, hold this, and be aware of what I'm doing. So that's always really helpful. And then also, just as a side note, women have a slightly different, their nervous system focus is slightly different than men. And what this means is that social engagement is weighted heavier in a woman's nervous system than a man's nervous system. So, something that can be really helpful, and this is because for our social nervous system, it's all about looking outwards and seeing if we are part of the community. And for some reason, the women's one is weighted that way, which I guess it makes sense from all the gatherings and everything that we used to do. And what is really showing up in some of the practitioners that I study with is that our social nervous system is getting activated by Instagram, by Facebook, and it's having a disproportionate effect. And so if you notice that somebody is with women, it often shows up as collapse. And so what that means is that they go into the freeze response, but they go even deeper to the point where they can't even like move, they can't function, they can't think. And so all of a sudden they start telling you that they want to do all these things, and then there's no movement. And that's a collapse response. That's more than a freeze response. So if you happen to notice a person is really attached to the phone and they are on Instagram or Facebook all the time, part of what's happening could be that they are in the freeze response or they're in the collapse response and they're trying to make sure that they're part of community. So creating connection with that person and creating a sense of you're safe and you can be present and you're accepted. It's basically acceptance that they're looking for with the social nervous system. So that's just something to notice, I think. Okay, I'm almost done. And I just want to say I have a little card here that says, "What happens when we heal trauma?" And I think that this is really, really just amazing what happens. So we have more energy because it's not tied up in the trauma vortex. We have better focus and memory. We have better decision making skills. We have the capacity to reach goals because we're not in any of those activations. We can actually set a goal and take the steps towards it. Um, we can develop good boundaries. We have a feeling of safety that starts to develop inside the world, which is really weird, but oh my God, it's freaking amazing when it develops because all of a sudden you're like, oh, I feel like I'm a normal human being now. I can engage with people. I feel like I am connected with people. Something with complex PTSD is that we always feel like we're an alien. We always feel misunderstood. We always feel like we can't relate to people because we're so stuck inside of all this trauma and everything. And so when that starts to clear up, we start to feel we can be safe, we can start to trust people, we can start to open up and be part of humanity and a community, and we get connection. Our self worth increases, our self expression becomes honest. So, by this, I mean we aren't driven by our social nervous system of making ourselves look like everybody else. and making so that we can actually be part of a community. We trust that by being ourselves, we are part of a community, so there's that slight difference. And choices are created. I remember just constantly feeling like I had no choice. I was just where I was. There was no choice. There was no option. It was just so, my life was so out of my own control because of the traumas that were just hijacking my system. And that's what it felt like constantly. It was like myself, I would want this. And then my system gets hijacked by the trauma. And all of a sudden, I've lost 3 months to a freeze response. And I can't remember half of what happened. Probably not very much. It probably was me looking out of a window for a very long time. But, I kind of lost that capacity to make choices. And that's about it. And I just want to say that I would love to give a shout out to the Existence Project, which is doing amazing work giving voices to those unheard otherwise. And the Existence Project also made it possible for me to be here today. We've been working together, and Marco has been acting as my mentor. And just, yeah, it's been amazing. So check out the Existence Project and what they're doing, because they're doing really awesome work. And that's all I got. I'm open for questions, comments.
Thank you so much, Serafina. That was awesome. I wrote so many notes for myself, so I'm excited. Yeah, if anyone wants to ask questions, please feel free to just shout them out or put them in the chat. Whatever works for you. I'm going to link the Existence Project right now in the chat for everyone to look up too.
That was incredible. You did such a good job. There's a lot of information here.
Thanks.
This is great.
I would really like to thank you for your talk. I think that was awesome. I have so much knowledge and skills that I can take forward now. So much of what you said is so relevant, and yeah, I mean, it's just amazing what I've got from that. I haven't even processed it yet. So thank you very much. It's great. So I feel so honored to have listened to you today. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree as well. That was really informative, and thank you. I also made a whole bunch of different notes because I found that a lot of the things that you were mentioning is just things that I was also looking for answers to. So I really appreciate that. And I do have one specific question about something that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. You mentioned that in regards to the collapse response, people will tell you all of the things that they want to do, but then no action follows. And I'm wondering, are they telling you what they want to do like generally, or is it more of like what they want to do that day? Is there or is it both?
Yeah, it's kind of like I can speak to how it showed up in my life and how that was. It would be something like, yeah, I'm gonna go get a job, and I'm gonna go get a house, and I'm gonna do all these things. And then I would actually clear my calendar or something like that. And I would be like, yeah, I'm gonna go do this thing. And then I would sit there and then I would do nothing. And then a week later, somebody would be like, hey, so did you actually do the thing? And I'd be like, no. And they'd be like, did you do anything? And I'm like, no, I did absolutely nothing to it, because I felt like what it feels like inside of me is let me see if I can describe how it feels. Because freezing is just getting immobilized, just the inability to move. And I've always noticed that once I get to moving, even if it's just my finger, even if it's just my head, then all of a sudden it's it kind of breaks the freeze. With a collapse, it's more just kind of there's a feeling inside of me of just the complete inability to move forward on anything that I was committed to. And it's so overwhelming. The only thing that I can do is just not deal. Is that helpful?
It is. Yeah, it is. Thank you.
There's a question.
Oh.
Oh, you're going to say the same thing. There's a question in the chat from Marco, and he is wondering where you are at with your organization and what you're looking for as far as moving forward.
Oh, yes. So the Seraphim project, thank you, Marco, for reminding me. So the Seraphim project is just being birthed right now, and I am specifically looking for a charity organization to partner with that would allow me use of their charitable number, so I can start getting some grants and getting my programming for educating going. I can't see that full question, and I think I missed a comment.
Yeah, so his question was, where are you at with your organization and what are you looking for moving forward, as far as moving forward? And then after there's 2-3 comments, I can read them if that's helpful.
That would be.
Yeah, okay. So there's, thank you for sharing your heart and soul with us, Serafina, heart. And there's also the theme of the talk is, the theme of the talk is possibly very relevant to many different types of lived experience, especially, or depending on the individual, PWP, HIV, Hep C, Indigenous, newcomers to Canada. And then the last comment is, I see from the link your current project is for end consumers. What do you have? Do you have anything planned for organizations who sponsor support peer work? I would love to have you teach a trauma-informed communications class at the groups where I work.
Yeah, that's come up in the last week or two, and so I'm now starting to develop and look into making something like that happen. So please definitely reach out. You can reach out through my website. Yeah, I'm definitely working that out.
Sweet. Yeah, I did share the website earlier. I'll just share it again.
I have a question.
Yeah, go Jenny.
Sure.
And I have a question.
I'm wondering, like, at what, because as peers coming into work, like, there's a lot of carrying of past traumas and coming in, and to then be in a place of support and clarity is difficult many times. There's triggers that happen, and what I notice and happen to myself often regular. So there's this question of, oh, should I be doing this work? Am I ready yet? And like, I'm someone that's had quite a lot of support and years of being in a good place and feeling fairly safe as well. So it's definitely a question that comes up for me. It's like, at what point is it, safe enough to do? But I think that everyone's going to have their own answer to that. And if there's any reflections on it, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I feel like that's a really, that's something that is a really personal decision. I personally have stayed out of doing peer work for a long time because I have been helped by both peers that were ready to help others and by those who weren't ready to help others. And I think that it takes a bit of self-awareness and a bit of maturity to kind of understand where your limits are and work within them. For myself, I just wanted to be at a place where I understood myself enough to know what my boundaries would be, because boundaries were such a big issue for me. And so I wanted to be able to be assertive and ask for what I need and ask for help when I need help. Like, I wanted to make sure that I was doing this in a place where I knew I just felt grounded in myself and able to help,
Yes, thank you for the reflection. Yeah, I agree. It's a very personal journey. Totally. And I think we need so much support with it, much more than we currently have. I think
100%.
yeah, and just doing the workshops that we've had too, it's peers saying there's a lot of expectation, and it's sometimes it's just not realistic, and because there needs to be so much more support, and yeah, that's a big element.
100%. I think it should be part of, it should be given to you as part of your job instead of you having to actively seek it out. And I remember being inside of one of the shelters I tried to stay at, and they had 1 or 2 people for 40 people. And the support workers were just overloaded. And it was crazy. I was like, no wonder why you're overloaded. Like, this is just too much. It's just too much. You know, we do need more supports for support people, for sure.
Hi, Serafina.
Hi,
Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah. Hi, my name's Keisha.
Hi.
I am just so inspired, processing, just relieved, and I feel my energy's gone up after listening to you, because you've given so much information that I believe a lot of, not just organizations, but also policymakers and in the healthcare system, is starting to really do more trauma informed work. And it's a slippery slope, because I think it's in the beginning stages for a lot of people. And I think really having really being able to dig deep into some of the scientific stuff really helped me reflect a lot, even on a lot of the work that I was doing in, the movement, the AIDS movement, for a long time. And I recognized all of the symptoms that you talked about, the collapse response. And what it's done for me today is it's furthering my growth, it's furthering my healing, it's furthering who I am as a peer now, how I see myself, or even just as a human being. And also being able to apply some of those skills that I'm learning now at 50, and that I can share that with my children, one who is deeply traumatized and is struggling. And this is giving me hope that I can actually help him a little bit more, because I understand a lot more, as opposed to just coming from my perspective. I'm able to see more from his perspective because of the responses that you're talking about. So, wow, I'm just so, like, just blown away and lifted up and inspired by your presentation. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sage,
Yes,
you still have a question?
I do. I was wondering about, so um when you're talking about when someone's disassociated, and I've seen this and I've experienced this in as well, like when someone's not used to being in their body, or it's been unsafe for them to be in their body, and when they're in the process of trying to come back, or they might kind of go in and out possibly. I'm just wondering if you would be able to speak to like your personal experience with that, and like strategies of supporting somebody who is like not like not comfortable being in their body, and just like how to support somebody when you're especially witnessing that. That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So it's a big question because in somatics, there's something called the CIBAM channels, and it references to the different ways that we perceive information and different people who, and how you can use these different channels of perception to work with somebody to meet them where they're at. And when you're working with somebody who is disassociating, I really do believe that you have to meet them where they're at. You have to also ask them, like, how can I help you right now? And give them options if they don't know, right? I found for myself personally that when I disassociate, I tend to tell stories more. So like having somebody ask me questions, really helps, because then I start to tell stories, and when they're asking me questions, they're interrupting that leaving of my body, if that makes sense. Another thing that really helps is doing the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, which you've probably done before. Should I review that exercise? So the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is basically going through all of your senses, and you go in rotation. 5 things that you see, 5 things that you can smell, 5 things that you can sense like that you can touch for texture. Then you do 4 things, and then you do 3 things, and then you do 2 things and 1 thing. That was the first thing that I was taught that would bring me back to my body. Another thing that would bring me back to my body is texture. Texture seems to work a lot for people. So giving them something that they can touch, that they can play with, that often helps. The grounding exercise that I did in the beginning of the class, you can do without the orientation spot. So you focus on your feet, you focus on your seat and how that feels. And then you open your eyes and you literally look around the space and you say 5 things that you see with the color attached to it. So for me, that would be a white candle, a green plant, a brown fireplace. Because for me, that works really well to go from the feet up to actually help me. With people who disassociate, typically they have a trigger, so helping them identify what that trigger is. And typically people who disassociate also have certain gateways, I call them gateways, of how you can invite them back into their body. So when I have my hardcore triggers where I don't have any control over them, what I need from people is different from when I'm just like slightly disassociating in a situation. What I need when I'm hardcore out of my body, it's like I need somebody to be there talking to me. They can't touch me or I get worse. And I think it's really individual for people too. That's another thing that I also want to bring up though, now that you've asked the question, is that if you know that somebody has a trauma history, I feel like it's a very good thing to check in with them. And I think that Marco did this with me when we first started working together, to kind of just check in and be like, when you have a reaction, how can I help you? Like, and it actually made me feel safe with him and started to build that trust with him, because I was like, oh wow, somebody who is actually recognizing that this might happen and who wants to be prepared and who wants to help. I was like, that's really amazing, because that doesn't happen very often.
Totally. Yeah, thank you for that. That was really helpful. I love that activity. I know the activity you did at the beginning too was really great. So thank you for taking us through that. I'm just looking at the time. I know we could probably be asking you questions all day, but we are getting to the end here, and I was just hoping that we could launch the poll. If Jenny, if you wouldn't mind doing that. We just have 2 questions. But yeah, go ahead. You can.
Before you do that, is there any questions that I missed in the chat? I won't take any new ones, but I want to make sure I get all the questions that came in already.
There's some comments.
Yeah.
Very powerful. Wow, you spoke to many of my concerns regarding folks I see every day. You have definitely impacted my approach and understanding. Thank you. Very impactful. It's crazy how trauma is an optional elective course for social workers. This is essential knowledge. So glad someone is taking leadership around this and making it accessible. And then love how you've been able to respond to a huge gap in service delivery. Your commitment and devotion is remarkable.
Thank you, everyone.
Appreciated you. Thank you so much. I'm wondering too if there's any handouts. Like I took some notes from the presentation. I would totally be willing to share with people here if you're interested in some notes, or if Serafina, you have some to share too. Is that an option?
Yes. And before we go, Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine kind of sets you up for a somatic approach of the nervous system and speaks the trauma vortex. And Nurturing Resilience is my favorite book.
Great book. Great book.
Yeah. So this one goes deeper into the science of the polyvagal theory. And then the second half of the book, so the first half of the book is very science. And then the second half of the book is very much more practical.
Mm.
I was wondering.
Great. Good stuff. Okay, if that's it, I'll launch the poll.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming.
This is not the one. Sorry. Okay, there we go.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Serafina. That was amazing.
You have a bright future.
Yes.
Thank you. Was there another question that came in that I can answer while the poll is in progress?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Douglas asked, some freeze emotional memory in a particular place in their body. Have you tried that approach of learning feelings?
Can you rephrase the question, please?
Well, I know for me, when I'm confronting or walking through my trauma, that there'll be a heightened awareness in a particular place in my body. And if I just relax a bit, usually for me, it's in the solar, what do they call it? The center of my chest, my abdomen. So, it helps me work through and learn what those feelings are. And I just had that experience a short while ago, and it's important for me.
Thing is, like, if you were to book once I start offering somatic coaching, a lot of what we do is go into the feelings inside of your body and we track them. And then we start to bring in different situations and help you pendulate between what we call resource and like we resource you and then we go into the situation. So it's kind of like we're using the nervous system in a way that helps you to develop the capacity to feel without overwhelm. So that's a lot of what somatic experiencing is about. So if you want to explore that further, you might want to look into somatic experiencing because it's been absolutely life-changing for myself. I just felt like that was going to be a little too much for this particular workshop.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, well, thanks again, Serafina. It was so great. I hope you can stick around if you want. But yeah, hopefully we have that information to contact you, and that's great. So we'll put everyone in the waiting room again during the break, and then we'll welcome you all back. See you soon.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. See you later.
Thank you. We'll be back at 4. We're both like going through. Hi, Janice. Hi, Janice. We're just putting everybody in the waiting room. There. Awesome. It's just us. It's just us. Happy birthday. I gotta say.
Happy birthday! No, really. What has a special day? You're muted.
My daughter, between work and this call, my daughter called and my granddaughter was, she'll be one. So my daughter turned 36 days ago.